Israel has the goal to isolate Palestinians and to cover the reality with a lid. The calculations of the occupation is that the old will die and the young will forget. Before the very sad events in Gaza, very few people in the Islamic and Arab world thought of Palestine as if it is dead, and normalization was imposed in our region. What is happening now in Gaza, it's a moment of awakening. It's the peak of the confrontation between the colonized and their colonizers. It's very difficult for the Palestinians and their supporters. And yet, we are better off than the Israelis. No one wants to be an Israeli in the world now. We are better off. In Palestine, when internationals do research and practice Western psychiatry using the usual conventional surveys that measure symptoms, they end up making the wrong conclusion. Much of the pain of the people cannot be dealt with in a psychiatric clinic. We need to change the reality of people. The context is sick, not the people. And we need to put all our efforts to changing the oppressive, destructive reality of the people. If I don't see an end to the Palestinian occupation during my lifetime, I'm satisfied enough by the fact that I am on that pathway. We are not promised, from a spiritual point of view, that we will be rewarded in this lifetime for our deeds. But we believe that eventually we will be rewarded for that, even if it doesn't happen during our lifetime, even if we don't achieve it very soon. It is an honor to be on that pathway.
Palestine today isn't just facing a political crisis, but a deeply psychological one. And today, we're here to unpack this notion with Palestinian psychiatrist, psychotherapist, author, and former head of the mental health unit at the Palestinian Ministry of Health. Dr. Samah, welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm pleased and it's my honor to be on your show. Thank you for having me.
Dr. Samah, let's start at the very beginning. The reality that you've seen for the past 20 years almost within your practice, and especially for the 22 months of the Gaza genocide. What have you seen is the most common psychological impact within your Palestinian patients in terms of the effects of the bombardment, massacres, and killings on their psyche?
I have the living and the working experience in Palestine. And having the living experience in Palestine helps me a lot in my working experience. So the political violence in Palestine is systemic, structural, deliberate violence. Deliberate because it has the intention of imposing a feeling of helplessness and resignment on people. Understanding this helps us to invent a reaction or a response that tries to maintain the agency and the dignity of the Palestinian people. Violence everywhere has a profound psychological impact. It can produce traumatic reactions. It can make people lose their sense of agency, and it passes from one generation to another. In Palestine, we have the experience of protracted historical colonial violence that not only affects masses of human beings, but also it impacts the connection, the relationship between people. And we make a big mistake if we focus on the individual and the psychological damage that happens to the individual, and we ignore the damage that happens to the social fabric. Because even when the individual goes through therapy, healing process, the community will suffer from mistrust, internalization of inferiority, the possibility of fratricide and killing each other in reaction to chronic trauma. So this is a very unique situation. It's not only in Palestine that the political intertwines with the personal. In Palestine, maybe we have an extreme case, but the lessons that can be generated from Palestine apply to different parts in the world where there is structural systemic violence that cannot be counteracted only by focusing on the individual. We need to help the individual, but also contribute to undoing the systemic violence and its impact on the social fabric of the people.
Now, when we talk about that trauma that is internalized within individuals, as you say, how can we sort of mitigate that ongoing? So the trauma is ongoing and the bombardment is ongoing as well. How do we narrow down targeting the treatment for said individuals?
It is very challenging to do this, especially under bombardment. All the conventional interventions in mental health assume that we are working in a safe place. And in Palestine, we don't have the safe place. Not only under bombardment in Gaza, we don't have the safe place. Even in Jerusalem and the West Bank, where we work in our offices, people worry about safety. They worry about safety because, for example, I work with victims of torture and ex-detainees. When I make the appointment for the coming visit, they tell me, if I don't go back to prison, I will come. So that general sense of safety is missing. Also, the patients express concern about confidentiality, about the safety of the clinical setting. Sometimes they ask me to take my mobile phone and computer outside the clinic, the room where I'm doing the interview. Sometimes they tell me, excuse me, doctor, I don't want to give you my real name. I will give you a different name or initials. And I accept that because I understand the boundaries of safety in our environment. And if the people choose to do so, and if this makes them more comfortable in the encounter, in the clinical encounter, let them do it. So I tell them, that's fine as far as you remember the initials or the pseudonym that you gave me.
For consistency, subhanAllah.
So to go back to your question, lack of safety is a big challenge, but also this doesn't mean that there is nothing that we can do. I learned something from Gaza. When I saw the medical system, the mental health system that was built there, it was a humble, modest, but effective system. And I contributed to building that system in Gaza. When we saw it being demolished within the first weeks of the carnage that is taking place in Gaza, we needed to be humble in our reaction. The assumption that we mental health experts should lead the work of healing is a wrong assumption. In reaction to the destruction to the health system in Gaza, people started doing their own groups, their own community and social support organically. For example, some teachers and youth activists started taking care of children who lost education. Some women started creating listening circles to the mothers and women who lost a family member. The community started showing solidarity to help the ones who have severe losses or the ones who were touched by damage more than others. This was the case until another strategy was used against the Palestinians, starvation. And starvation has the agenda of attacking the organic solidarity and connectedness of the Palestinian community. And I want to say two things about starvation. First, there is a well-known study about semi-starvation that was conducted in 1944 in Minnesota, and where people had to survive on 1,400 calories. It was semi-starvation over several weeks. And within a few weeks, the study was interested in the physical and psychological consequences of starvation. Within few weeks, people started having serious psychological consequences: loss of interest, loss of desire, inability to talk, loss of energy. They became obsessed about food. They started eating things that are not edible, and they lost their critical thinking, and it was easy to control them. So when I think of the deliberate starvation in Gaza, I understand that this is a plan against the Palestinian notion of sumud and resilience. And this is happening by plan. And it's, I think, the final strategy that Israelis using to break the will and the agency of the Palestinian people. And I have to admit that we mental health professionals are not saviors, we are not omnipotent. On the one hand, we are part of the population and we are experts in the psychological consequences of this unusual situation. Our hope is that our knowledge and expertise will help people understand the deliberate harm that targets them. Now, does this understanding change the reality? Maybe, sometimes. This understanding might make people keen on not losing their agency in the face of horrors that target them. And this is not an easy challenge. And I have to emphasize that in order to maintain the collective resilience of the Palestinian people, we who are less affected by the situation, we who are looking at this situation from afar but are very concerned, we need to find ways to nourish the resilience and to stand up against it. So one last thing I want to say about my work in Palestine, because sometimes we are confronted with situations where we cannot do many things. The restrictions on the ground prevent us from doing the conventional work that we mental health professionals are expected to do. This puts a new responsibility on us to inform the world about our observations. We need to expand our role as clinicians. We do what can be done in the clinical setting, but we have the ethical and moral responsibility to contribute to advocacy, sharing our observations and our thinking and our testimony with a wider world that can react to this situation. And my writings can contribute to this responsibility of bearing witness and providing testimony about the things that I cannot respond to as a clinician.
That's the amazing thing about your work, subhanAllah, from psychiatry, and now you are authoring your own work, which just shows how dedicated you are to the cause. And that is very important because these voices that have been suppressed are now being represented, whether it's through your research, your writings, your new book, inshallah, which we'll talk about. I wanted to draw on a particular aspect of your work, which is you often say that colonialism actually doesn't take land only, but it rewrites identity. What does that mean?
Colonialism is interested in the land and its resources and damages everything that gives life to the colonized. The Israeli occupation is interested in killing as many Palestinians as possible or dispossessing them, expelling them outside Palestine. And if he cannot do that, he will damage their identity, their culture. The experience of expelling Palestinians from where they are is a big attack on the identity. When you move from, even for the internally displaced people, when you move from one place to another, the people in Gaza had the experience of displacement 10 times, 12 times, 20 times. Your home vanishes, your neighborhood, your neighbors, you lose your job. Every component of that makes who you are. When I met with Palestinian refugees in Italy and in Australia, with this experience of displacement, and I know it also from working with some Syrian refugees in the past and some people from Yemen and Iraqis, when people are dispossessed, they lose their sense of purpose sometimes and their sense of belonging to a certain community or certain group. All of that is a big attack on the identity. The repression, the oppression, the severe punishment makes people silent, afraid of using a language that represents what's in their hearts and minds. There is a big compromise on their agency. That also is a depersonalizing experience. I studied abroad. I left Palestine for a few years. I come from Jerusalem. And I remember when I came back from my studies in France, when I came back to Jerusalem, first my family had to move their home because the separation wall was built so close to our home in the suburb of Jerusalem to the point that it blocked the horizon. If I look from the windows, I cannot see the sky and the trees that I used to see before. So they were forced to move from one home to another. But also walking through the streets of Jerusalem, there is a slow, continuous process of changing the city. For many years, Israelis spoke about allowing only 12% of the citizens of Jerusalem to be Palestinians. They don't use the term Palestinians, Arabs, as if a cosmopolitan representation. So they do everything to push us away. So walking through the streets of Jerusalem, you see the attack on the culture and the identity. We feel that the Jerusalem is shrinking underneath our feet. We are not on solid ground in Jerusalem. All Jerusalemites like myself, we have identity papers referring to us as temporary residents of the state of Israel. Our nationality is undefined. So this is the concrete thing on paper. But in reality, when you see a building, an old Palestinian building, taken by the Israelis, you see on the walls the Islamic Arabic writing carved into stone, but you see many Israeli flags around it. So this is a shocking image of how the place changes in a way that makes people feel alienated in their own land, in the land of our fathers and grandfathers.
And it's amazing to see that still etched literally into the walls. So they cannot remove this resilience. It's empowering and it stays with the people. It's almost like the biggest weapon we have against our enemy. So that in itself, do you think that the Israeli army sees it as the most weaponized force, the Palestinian identity in itself, the resilience that they have?
I think the calculations of the occupation is that, as this was expressed in their literature, the old will die and the young will forget. Our response to that is that we revive our historical memory and we reaffirm our attacked identity. So of course, this doesn't go with their calculation, with their plan, with their agenda for the Palestinians.
SubhanAllah, it's very interesting to note that some people are only just waking up to the reality that we see on the ground, the reality of the Gaza genocide. But I wanted to know, have the Palestinian people, their morale, their identity, has it been shaped by the support that they receive from thousands of strangers, millions of strangers online? How does that affect their psyche?
I have always declared that the international solidarity with the Palestinian people has the potential to mitigate the traumatic effects on Palestinians. Israel has the objective, the goal, to isolate Palestinians and to cover the reality with a lid. The solidarity that we receive from the world, it maintains the connection, our human connection with the world. It prevents Palestinians from an expected and understandable consequence of our colonial trauma, which is having a very negative outlook at a world that allowed so much harm to come upon us. So there is no doubt that the international solidarity with Palestinians has a very important psychological effect. It's validating, it is acknowledging, it gives us the feeling that we need to express our agency. And it might be reciprocating, the feeling that somebody out there hears us and reacts to our pain is, in a way, it can help us feel that we are not losing our human connection with the world. Now, there is another big discussion whether this international solidarity is politically effective or not. And to look at the situation objectively, the international solidarity has not managed to stop 22 months of carnage. And the international solidarity can be depleting for certain individuals and yet very weak in changing the decisions of the Western governments that are in every possible way supporting the carnage in Gaza. Diplomatically, from a point of view of media, providing military aid to Israel. So I think that the international solidarity movement needs to reconsider their ways of acting and working locally in order to support Palestinians.
And amidst all of that support and that international protesting that we see, subhanAllah, lately we had almost 500,000 people on the Harbour Bridge protesting, voicing their concerns, speaking out for humanity. These numbers, they mean something, but people can only take a certain amount of pushing and lobbying until they start to feel despair or that it's perhaps not reaching their goal. What advice do you have for these individuals locally, globally, watching, looking on, and feeling the pain that these Palestinian people feel?
It was impressive to see the images of the Harbour Bridge in Sydney and uplifting to our spirit. So the mobilization was impressive. Now, I think we need to move from mobilization to organization, because mobilization can be impressive, but it is usually reactive to a certain event. And usually people disengage when they go back after the big reactive event. So, and I'm not in a position to advise you on your local strategy. I just want to say that organization is very important, and you need to organize at a district level, at a national level, and international level. What has been going on in Palestine is very urgent, and it requires that we reconsider our way of responding to the tragedy. It is a moment, before the latest events, the very sad events and tragic events in Gaza, I think that very few people in the Islamic and Arab world thought of Palestine. People started reacting to the Palestinian cause as if it is dead, and normalization was imposed in our region. And in spite of the severe human loss and tragedy and the risks that are still taking place and becoming more serious, we need to look at the positive aspect of this dark picture. It is the international the international mobilization for Palestine. It's very difficult for the Palestinians and their supporters. And yet, we are better off than the Israelis. No one wants to be an Israeli in the world now. We are better off. But my advice to people is that no ordinary people, ordinary individuals don't have an adequate response to this unusual situation. We were all surprised by this situation. I think critical political consciousness and dialogue among those who are affected by the situation in Palestine, our supporters from the Arab world, from the Muslim world, and many people who share our vision for liberty and humanity in the world, they need to rethink their ways of providing an adequate response to this situation. It's a moment of awakening. What is happening now in Gaza is the peak of the confrontation between the colonized and their colonizers. This matter is now a Palestinian matter, but the lessons learned are universal. They matter to many people in the world. So anyone who has a position against colonization can take a stand on what's happening in Gaza and in Palestine. And this is the right moment to educate about it, to mobilize, to organize. We should not miss that opportunity. And one last thing that I want to say about people in solidarity. I think in difficult times, we ground ourselves in spirituality and philosophy and faith to better understand the world and respond to it. My understanding of our struggle for justice is that we don't judge our efforts by the destination, by the end goal that we hope and aim to achieve. It is the journey by itself, the pathway that we choose for ourselves. So even if we don't achieve what we want to achieve in our lifetime, we should be satisfied by the journey, and we should hope that even if we don't reach the end goal, we will pass the torch from one person to another, from one generation to another. This belief has helped us Palestinians. And that's why, it's been a century since the Balfour Declaration until today. The Palestinians have not given up their struggle for justice and liberation. And I think this is a message that can be exported outside Palestine for our supporters, while Israel exports spying machines to the world. I think Palestinians can export their resilience and the Palestinian notion of sumud to the international community.
And it's such an important, impactful concept, sumud, and staying true to your identity. It's something that has touched millions around the world. In fact, some people have been inspired by the Palestinian legacy in itself and converted to Islam, just inspiration by their actions and how they carry out their religion, their faith through their lives. And subhanAllah, I wanted to touch very briefly on how you, Dr. Samah, how you feel as you continue to work in this field. It's incredibly emotional to go through this on a day-to-day basis, from patients to seeing their conditions and oftentimes maybe not knowing the best way to help them out. Like some people are feeling helpless, despairing, very tired of the states that they live in. And it's almost very paramount to ask, how are you coping with this emotionally? How do you deal with this on a day-to-day basis?
I share the Palestinian collective grief and the fear and anxiety about the future and about what might happen to Gaza. At the same time, I'm grateful that I have a profession that gives me an important role to play in reaction, in response to this tragedy. I'm grateful every time I can help a Palestinian person. I'm grateful for every opportunity in which I can use my living experience as a Palestinian person and my working experience in Palestine to teach and share lessons and wisdom that can be very inspiring to the world. I think Palestine is a very troubled place, and yet there are very important human lessons that can be extracted and synthesized from the Palestinian experience. So I'm very thankful for this connection within Palestine among Palestinians of all classes, Palestinians from every fragmented Palestinian community. I learn a lot there, and I can pass this knowledge and this wisdom and this witnessing to a wider world. And I think I can carry back with me to the Palestinians the emphasis that we are not alone and we are connected with humanity to many people in the world. Those are important things that sustain me in difficult time. And there are some difficult moments where I need to slow down a little bit and find resources around me from my friends and colleagues so that I can continue. I think growing up in Palestine has equipped me with a special capacity, which is the ability to see the little invisible positive things in a very dark picture. I think I have this capacity, and I can detect these positive moments in very difficult time.
And I think that in itself is such a beautiful, empowering message, not only to your patients, but globally, people watching, seeing this response from a professional psychiatrist from Palestine is in itself a testament to that resilience. And I wanted to now draw on your book, which is such an emblem of the Palestinian identity in itself, Radiance in Pain and Resilience. Can you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write this piece and what it means to you, and perhaps what viewers around the world, what you'd like them to take away from it?
So this book is a collection of essays. Some were written before what's taking place in Gaza now, and some of them are about Gaza. I saw Gaza and I used to go and work in Gaza before the escalation of violence. But most of the texts were written in response to the events in Gaza. And I'm very thankful to my colleagues from Shifa Project, and especially my colleague Zainab Hinnawi from Palestine. She works with me because they encouraged me a lot to publish this book in English, and they made the effort to collect the pieces and classify them into different chapters. The title of the book, Radiance in Pain and Resilience, as you see here, the word radiance has multiple meanings. I think the most common meaning that comes to people's minds is the shine, the radiance of the sun, for example, the shine. But also in medicine, we talk about radiating pain, a pain that can be felt in a part of your body which is distant from where it originates. So I use this word with the double meaning that it has. There is radiance in pain, and the Palestinian resilience inspires and shines in different parts of the world. And the subtitle is about the global reverberation of Palestinian historical trauma. And I need to explain this pain, what I mean by historical trauma, because usually the dominant understanding of trauma in the world that generates knowledge and research, we talk about short-term individual trauma, like a car accident, with a clear beginning and a clear end. But the trauma that Palestinians experience is a protracted trauma over 1 century that touches the vast majority of Palestinians. Even the Palestinians in diaspora, 2/3 of the Palestinian nation, are affected by this trauma. The people who lost homes and were dispossessed, they lost their identity, and they were treated by some countries as a burden. So this is a special kind of trauma, the historical trauma. And while this trauma can be like an old scar for the people in the diaspora, we who live in the Palestinian territories, for us, the wound is still open because it's a historical colonial trauma where systems of oppression continue crushing the people at an individual level, but also at the level of connection and relations with others. So here I'm presenting a perspective on trauma that is less heard of, because most of the literature produced on trauma comes from the West, and it is about primary trauma, short-term trauma that touches individuals. And this is way more complex. And it requires of us to provide a different response in reaction to the psychological consequences of this kind of trauma. Different therapeutic response, I mean.
And it's such a timely piece as well. I think a lot of people around the world are looking for a resource such as this to know the reality of what is actually going on in terms of the psychiatric field. And I wanted to touch upon the de-colonial approach of psychiatry that you mention in your works. What does it mean in light of the Palestinian context today?
So the de-colonial liberation approach to mental health is an approach that acknowledges the systemic violence, the structural oppression that generates a lot of pain and psychological distress in the individuals. If we ignore this approach and practice Western psychiatry for marginalized, occupied people, we will end up attributing the suffering to the person, to the individual, thinking that this is a personal dysfunction in the individual. It is normal for people to feel pain and distress in reaction to structural violence. In Palestine, when internationals do research using the usual conventional surveys that measure symptoms, they distribute them among the people, and they end up making the wrong conclusion that most of these people have psychological morbidity. Most of these people have pain. Pain is not psychological morbidity. Pain can be the appropriate response to this reality. Talking about psychological morbidity is another attempt to make Palestinians lose their credibility. They are portrayed by mainstream media, by the West, as either as terrorists or as people with psychological morbidity. I prefer to be cautious and avoid pathologizing people's pains and distress in reaction to trauma. I don't deny that there are certain people who suffer a lot, and this suffering can affect their ability to respond in a healthy way to their situation. And they need individual help. But the vast majority of Palestinians, they are in collective grief, in pain, in distress, and we need to, in order to respond appropriately to that, we need to challenge the power structures that are producing all that pain. The intervention should not lie in the individual who suffers, but it should question the power structure that is producing all that pain, that can be misdiagnosed as an individual pathology. So the de-colonial approach to mental health help us to make this distinction, avoid pathologization, and it requires of us to not only help the individuals, but also be agents for change and challenge the power structures that are oppressive and do damage to people.
And within these oppressive structures, within the communities that are shattered with grief, I mean, daily mothers who are losing their children due to starvation. We have imams leading the khutbah saying that they do not have the capacity to speak, having the prayer being, initiated very quickly because they cannot speak due to hunger. How have you seen within your patients the presence of Palestinians actually coming to seek psychiatric help? Is it something that they are doing proactively? Do you find a lot of people reaching out for that sort of help?
In general, I think Palestinians who need psychiatric help are open to this possibility. Yet, much of the pain of the people cannot be dealt with in a psychiatric clinic. Yeah. We need to change the reality of people so that they will get better. I want to give an example that comes to my mind now. Dr. Muhammad Abu Salmiya from Gaza. He was detained, and I heard stories of maltreatment and torture that were very severe. When he came back, like many other doctors, when he came out of prison, he went back to his work. He put the stethoscope around his neck and he went back to work. Still, the conditions are very difficult for him, but I think that if there will be ceasefire tomorrow, I'm sure that a big number of people in Gaza, they will start rebuilding tomorrow. Tomorrow, if there will be ceasefire, people will go and start rebuilding Gaza. This is the spirit that people have. This tells us very clearly that the context is sick, not the people. And we need to put all our efforts to change the pathology in the context. There will be a small number of people who are affected severely and who will need more intensive intervention to help them go about their life after severe loss and trauma. But the vast majority of people, they will improve automatically when the pathological situation is changed. We talk a lot about trauma and traumatic reactions in response to political violence. I don't deny it, but I also want to say that in reaction to trauma, people develop adversity, advanced development, and there is also post-traumatic growth. And that also goes from one generation to another. And we talk a lot about vicarious trauma. When people watch a traumatic situation, they develop symptoms of trauma. But there is also vicarious resilience. There is also vicarious resilience when you see someone who can bounce back and respond to trauma in a healthy way. You might be inspired by this person. This person might be a reason to maintain your morality and maintain your well-being and mental health in very difficult times. So I don't think that all our thinking should be focused on trauma, and we should centralize trauma to a point that we become blind to other possibilities. And we should certainly emphasize that most of our intervention should go to changing the oppressive, destructive reality of the people. Once this is achieved, we can take care of the most affected at a later stage.
SubhanAllah, just to note how important that chant of Free Palestine, that vicarious resilience, as you put it, it's reverberating across the world, and it is now going into the majority of the worldview. SubhanAllah, it's only the minority really that don't see the reality of the Gaza genocide or try to deny it. But I guess in the lead up to seeing the free Palestine that we all make dua for, that we collectively want, how can we heal within ourselves to be ready to witness that reality?
I think our actions now contribute to our healing process. People get healing through their action against injustice. It will be difficult for the people who cannot do anything, who try to protect themselves and dissociate, stay away from what's going on. It's even worse for the ones who conceal the reality or who are complicit in what's taking place in Palestine. We hope that ceasefire is urgent, but I think the big project is to end the occupation of Palestine. And we should not lose our focus on this objective, this aim, this goal of ending the occupation of Palestine. Even if we don't achieve it very soon, it is an honor to be on that pathway, even if it doesn't happen during our lifetime. I maintain a critical hope. I have a feeling of what I call critical hope, not naive hope, about the situation in Palestine. I think that we should continue doing our utmost effort to struggle for justice in Palestine. And if I were not completely consumed in Palestine, I would struggle for other just causes in the world. This is my human responsibility. And when I talk about critical hope, maybe I hope to see a very quick ceasefire, a ceasefire very soon in Gaza. But if I don't see an end to the Palestinian occupation during my lifetime, I'm satisfied enough by the fact that I am on that pathway, in that I'm taking this journey. And I don't know, we are not promised from a spiritual point of view. There is no promise that we will be rewarded in this lifetime for our deeds, for our good deeds. But we believe that eventually we will be rewarded for that. And this belief makes us hopeful in what we are doing, and it spares us the disillusionment, because if you want quick reward, you will be disappointed. And this is the naive hope.
I truly ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to see that vision, that free Palestine, that end of the occupation. And I am so honored to have the pleasure of speaking to you, Dr. Samah Jabr. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you and utilize your amazing skills and outstanding efforts for the Ummah. And until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.